Up next, we have Skylar Playford, CCJC's own staff. So come on down here, Skylar. So Skylar is the manager of operations and project development with the Church Council, and oversaw the implementation of the pilot project on the You Have the Power curriculum. So we're happy to hear from you, Skylar.
Thanks. Okay, good morning. So I'll explain sort of where I fit into other people talking this morning. As Stephen mentioned, I kind of oversaw from an administrative point of view this project. So you heard from Catherine about what Nicole and You Have the Power, sort of the origin of the curriculum and an outline of it kind of. And then you heard from Kate how it came to Canada, what she's learned from running it in the Canadian version, and the impact on the people anecdotally. So what I'm going to tell you this morning is how CCJC became involved, and a little bit more detail about that, with these victim impact programs, and why are we as the Church Council on Justice and Corrections interested in promoting and studying this kind of program. So we're a national organization rooted in the Christian tradition, as you've heard, and we promote restorative justice, and also we sponsor initiatives to build healthier and safer communities. So we're interested in promoting healing and recovery from crime, obviously, as well as advancing crime prevention. And this involves developing healthy communities, which of course are built on healthy relationships. And so you may already be seeing the link here with empathy and why we're talking about that. CCJC is interested in developing empathy among people involved in the criminal justice system. And I'll just define my term a little bit here. When I say empathy, I'm meaning the experience of understanding another person's condition, their emotions, and their thoughts from their perspective. In other words, a cognitive, understanding-based approach to empathy, to understand the experience of others. Empathy helps people overcome a self-centered worldview, and it places them in a context of other human beings. So the way we see it is to learn empathy is to learn to see oneself in a community with other people who have their own dreams, insights, and challenges. And Rebecca put this in other words with the Kant formulation earlier. People are ends in themselves, and we have to come to be able to understand that other human beings are as human as us, and have their own complexity and their own rights. So empathy, I see it as a tool for escaping the prison of narcissism. It opens our minds to the needs of others and prepares us really to be with others in healthy and meaningful ways. So the concept of empathy is at the heart of CCJC's interest in victim impact programs. We want to learn more about how these programs help cultivate empathy in participants, and if they do, how is that working, and how might it do so more effectively if that's possible. And then how can these programs grow to benefit people who are not inmates? So you've probably drawn a few connections from what Kate said, but I'll tease out a little bit more too about the connections with families of incarcerated people, and then maybe what community members, correctional staff, we think this kind of mind expanding could be helpful, probably in other contexts. So that's some of the ideas and some of the curiosity that led CCJC to explore and to promote the Victim Impact Program so far. So I'll tell you about the project that we oversaw this winter, and then I'll say a few words about where we hope to go from here. So we were introduced to the idea of a victim impact program in 2013 when we heard Kate speak, and she had a co-presenter with one of the men she was talking about earlier who helped develop the program or research find it. And we were certainly intrigued, to say the least, by the stories of participants taking responsibility for the harms caused by their crimes in light of what they learned through the program. So in 2014, we got a small grant from Public Safety Canada to run a pilot program at Collins Bay Medium Security, as Kate said, in Kingston. So I should say we're calling this a pilot project, although this program has been run, as Kate said, with over 200 people by herself, and as well as Susan's continuing it. But we feel justified to call it a pilot project because, to our understanding, this is the first time it's been evaluated in Canada. So in that sense, something new. So what we were trying to do, our 4 objectives were to run a victim impact program, to evaluate it, to train a new facilitator who could then be able to run it on an ongoing basis, and create a Canadianized version, which Kate had been working on, but to sort of formalize that and create documentation about how to, a little bit more of a turnkey approach for somebody else who'd want to be doing it in Canada. So the pilot ran over this winter from November to February, and that included 12 weeks. It was a once-a-week schedule, a couple of weeks break over Christmas, and also the evaluation. So the short story is that we achieved our 4 objectives. 2 facilitators were trained, the program was run, it was evaluated, and now we have these documents to show how it can be done in Canada. So that's the short story. But there's a little bit of a longer story about what we learned. And I also want to be upfront about some of the concerns we have going forward. So this is sort of, we're working through how can we help champion this in Canada, but also make sure it's done in a responsible and meaningful way. So what we saw and what we learned. First about the chaplain. So the chaplain was a key partner in the project. And by this I don't mean Kate, I mean the chaplain at the institution where we were. She facilitated access to the institution by project staff. So like physically how we could get in and do an evaluation, but also creating the space within the chapel to run the program and to do the recruitment and get the curriculum in. So she did the recruitment, and probably because she had an existing trusting relationship with prisoners in the institution, the program had a waiting list, as you've heard before it has had. So not everyone who was interested and wanted to participate was invited to do so. The chaplain basically was a kind of a gatekeeper, and if she felt that the person was not ready to be accountable or to come to terms with some of the material that would be dredged up in the program and the issues related to victims, they weren't invited to participate. So our reliance on the personal insight and really the judgment of the chaplain has to be acknowledged in this project. So something to think about going forward, and I know this is something Kate's raised in other fora as well, is if the program is to expand, to be delivered on a larger scale, do we need a more formalized screening process for who can participate, and is there anything we're trying to screen out? That kind of thing. So that's one concern. So secondly, the program requires a skilled facilitator. Surely they all do, but I'll explain a little bit what we think that means here. So obviously someone who has a bit of experience working with incarcerated people, someone who can create what's called nowadays a safe space, or an atmosphere where participants feel they can be heard and be honest, and acknowledge their varied and their imperfect kind of opinions and answers. We heard from participants this was really important, sort of what they said would get put on the blackboard even if it wasn't the all the way perfect answer, or even if it was politically correct or whatever. So kind of conversely to that, someone who can adapt to the changing circumstances of the course and also deal with participants' resistance to the subject matter, the victim blaming stuff. It's not necessarily easy to moderate and work through that with people. So that's a really key skill. And finally, I'd say someone who has a restorative justice outlook. So someone who has a perspective on crime that emphasizes relationships, restoring relationships, recognition, and the possibility of healing. So as CCJC considers trying to facilitate this program in other institutions, the problem of training and working with chaplains or volunteers who have the right demeanor and the right skills is front of mind. Without currently a budget to conduct large-scale training the way that we understand You Have the Power does, how do we ensure appropriate facilitation? So related to that is the matter of workload for the chaplains. In the case of our pilot, a co-teaching model worked out. So the main facilitator had experience with the curriculum and was in a good position to provide training. And then the new facilitators also were in the institution more. So it was the chaplain and a regular restorative justice chaplaincy volunteer. So they were there to provide the one-on-one support that Kate explained is needed. They had kind of office hours when program participants knew that they were welcome to come and discuss and work through in a one-on-one way issues that arose for them through confronting the material in the course. Again, that's something they noted to us when we were evaluating at the end, that opportunity, that focus on self-care, which I think maybe we could talk about in the Q&A, but was explicitly inserted into the curriculum, but then also there's this opportunity to reflect was really needed. So that is a really major area of interest and concern for CCJC. We know that this course is designed to challenge and to provoke deep change in participants. That is difficult, and I don't know, maybe even in some cases a traumatic experience for people to go through. So we want to ensure that the program participants are supported to work through their new insights and to work toward healing through old wounds that may come up, be revealed through the course. From what we've seen, such supports are necessary to allow for the kind of transformation that the program invites and the kind of transformation we're hoping for. So that aftercare, the office hours, the reflection opportunities, it's crucial. Now, where does that leave prison chaplains? We recognize that they have a very heavy workload, is one pretty neutral way of putting it. If chaplains are going to be delivering this program, how do we ensure that this program supports the work they're already doing with incarcerated people, right? This isn't a panacea that's dropped from the sky into a terrible situation. Chaplains are doing really good work. already, this needs to support the kind of self-transformation and accountability taking work and supporting past victimization, as Kate talked about, supporting people working through all of that to let them have the time in there have a good purpose, right? So they're already doing this work, and we don't want to create any unreasonable or ideally any additional burden on them. So how do we properly provide the support through this program to support what they're doing? That's not an easy question for us to answer in this context. Okay, so also we're looking at evaluating empathy. So I want to say a teeny bit about what Nicole sent. They've run this program on a humongous scale in the States, as you've heard, and they've done big quantitative studies, which we haven't had the opportunity to do yet. So I'll just say something about what they've learned. So she says, the results of the evaluations they've done provide substantial support for the hypothesis that victim impact programs produce increases in specific aspects of offender knowledge, so knowledge about crime and just like what are the effects on the victim financially, et cetera, like the knowledge, and sensitivity to victims. So offenders exposed to the program had a significant increase in knowledge of the facts of victimization and increased knowledge of victims' rights, and then we're more sensitive to the plight of victims. So you'll see this is not totally dissimilar to what we're interested in. They're using pretty different language, but gets at some of what we're interested in knowing about too. So after completing this program compared to the control group, they found those differences. And when they looked at the subset of just male offenders, the majority of the male offenders believed they had the ability after the course to positively impact their community, but interestingly, not really still feeling like they belong to the community. In this subset of offenders, so the males, their increased knowledge of the effects of various crime was on victims and on family members. So they found the greatest change was found, they did chapter by chapter, kind of like pre and post test, and like, what did you know before we talked about property crimes, what did you know after? Very detailed. So the greatest change they found was for items on the topics of homicide, the media, and female sex offenders. The data was broken down by chapter, as I just said. So at the end of the class, 89% of offenders who completed the class felt they had a complete understanding of the impact their crimes created on their victim. So that's some of the data that they found. So in our case, I don't know if anyone said yet, but we were working with a group, I think 23 started, 22 finished, 1 was transferred. So pretty small. So we looked to our qualitative data to really learn something from this pilot experience. And they tell us something about the link with empathy. So what we did to gather the qualitative data was a story circle at the end of the evaluation, and we also asked an open-ended question as part of the questionnaire. So we had a before and after for that. So here we gained insight into the changes that participants experienced through the program. We saw that participants left the program with a broader understanding of the impacts of their actions, and especially the impact on family members. This is a theme Kate alluded to and we saw, certainly. So these tentative findings indicate the program may result in a change in empathy. So I'd like to share with you, just so you can hear for yourselves, some of the before and after questions. I'll share a couple of with you. So this was answers to the question, describe how you think victims are affected by crime. So before the course, someone says, victims are affected by crime because of the fear and anxiety that lasts a very long time. And the same person after the course says, victims suffer emotionally, physically, and financially. Victims would include the community and family members of the direct victims, which I never looked at as victims before this program. So another person before says, if the crime is violent, the victims are impacted. Or if they're robbed, they're impacted by losing their stuff. And afterward, the same person says, I think victims are strongly affected by crime, emotionally, physically, mentally. Some cases are so severe, they are irreparable and can be affected for years to come. I feel very bad for victims of crime. I never gave it much thought before this course. I've realized that everyone is affected by the crime, including myself and my family. So you won't be surprised to hear that in preparing this pilot project, we did quite a bit of research about empathy, trying to figure out what we were trying to study, what is the research already in this field. And one interesting thing we came up against was like the limits of empathy, very important to consider. So I was thinking about this when looking at what we learned and people's their sort of realizations around their families. So there was one ethicist we came across who had a piece about empathy being powerful to connect us to those that we're in contact with, people who are close to us. So it has the power to help us understand and maybe better live with people who are or can be imagined to be like our neighbors, our family, people in our community that we would actually see in touch. So in this sense, though, we have to admit, we're going to be telling the full story here, empathy probably has its limits. It may not be the best moral tool for helping us address things like global poverty or war in faraway places, and we'll probably need other moral tools to help get people interested and concerned about that. But empathy can link us through understanding to the people we interact with, and let's be honest, we could use still a lot of work on that. So the observation came to mind when we heard from program participants about their newfound understanding of the impact of their crimes on their own families. Through the Victim Impact Program, participants came to see that people that they loved and that they were in daily life with were harmed by their actions. Yeah, as Kate said, you may be surprised what surprised people, but nevertheless, it's noteworthy. It was actually surprising and quite unsettling for some participants to realize this. Connecting the victim perspective with their own families. So I would say step one is to try to understand what victims experience, and step two is to realize who are victims, and that creates powerful links of responsibility and understanding that weren't there before. And seeing it through the lens of their own discord in their personal relationships was really something that moved people. So in a story circle we did as part of the evaluation at the end, here were some of the comments we heard kind of related to family stuff. These are paraphrased. So one person said, the program should include more about how crime affects families of perpetrators, because this was very eye-opening. Another, it opened my eyes to how my actions affect my family and other victims. It, the course, should focus more on how families of perpetrators are victims. I think we could see that a bit as a barrier to empathy, but I see it more as an opening of the door. If you can see your family that way, and even if it can improve your family relationships, it's quite an important step. So finally, somebody says, if you feel you've been victimized by a family member, recognizing that many people behind bars have a history of victimization. So if you feel you've been victimized by a family member, this program can be a start to dealing with that past victimization. These accounts illustrate how a victim impact program can open people's minds to the experiences of victims. And by so doing, these programs create new links, as I said, of responsibility and understanding between participants and the people around them. We see a lot of potential here for nurturing healthier relationships, which in turn, of course, healthier and safer communities. So that's what we've learned from our pilot, and you probably are wondering what's next. So we're continuing to explore empathy and the role of empathy in developing good relationships and community safety. So the next issue of CCJC's publication, Sage, which I'm sure you all picked up a copy on your way in, the next one is devoted to this topic. We're looking at, for example, the relationship between empathy and shame, and also the neuroscience of empathy and restorative justice. There's some pretty interesting stuff happening around that right now. So we're also looking to develop victim impact projects to further study this program and understand its value in different settings. So in one case, we're working with chaplains and other faith organizations, for example, the Women's Interchurch Council, to adapt the program for women participants, and that'll be working with federally sentenced women. In community, we are aware of a halfway house that's running this program. We're trying to create some links with them, and also a community chaplaincy office that plans to run the program in a community setting. The delivery of victim impact programs in communities is an area we're exploring, and certainly one of which we're very supportive. So if any of this sounds interesting to you as a potential volunteer or offer some expertise or whatever, we'd welcome you to get involved. So you can connect with CCJC through, in front of Amber back there, I think, somewhere there's a sign-in sheet, or perhaps it's back on the table aside by Kate. All right, that's where it is. So wanted to give you the chance to sort of hear what it's about, and you'll hear more from Steve too, some more reflections before asking you to dive in. But if you're interested, we welcome you to stay in the loop. And also, of course, you could go through our website or talk with any of our volunteers after the Q&A. Thanks.
Thanks.